Bit of a change of plan into how I was going to talk about God being our provider today. That's the theme of today. You know, around the nation, churches will be celebrating harvest in all kinds of ways over the last month and a half. So I chose this passage from Exodus to talk about it. But then I was going to originally speak on Exodus 17. There are three passages. There's Exodus 15, when God provides. There's Exodus 16, when God provides. And there's Exodus 17, when God provides. I lumped for 17, but I now want to talk about 15, having stuck there this week. And it's great what God has been saying to me this week, and I hope it will be helpful to us. Father God, I pray that as we read this scripture together and as we delve into the truth of this story and its relevance for us, that you will powerfully work. I thank you that your word is active and living, and it's not dead or dusty or boring or irrelevant, but that it has power to change lives, and it's suitable for teaching and correcting and guiding and strengthening. So I pray your word will be powerful this morning as we read it together. Amen. Amen. So would you join me in reading with one voice from verse 22 to verse 27 of Exodus 15. You with me? Yeah. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made a decree and a law for them, and there he tested them. He said, "If you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped near the water. This is the word of the Lord. So we have been starting at the very beginning of our scriptures, traveling through Genesis, the early bit of Genesis, creation story. And we talked about how God has made us in a beautiful way to represent him, to be his image bearers, to be the ones who are demonstrate his reality and rule and authority in the world. Beautiful images, how we're made in beautiful images. And I hope that you're remembering to see the image of God in one another and to encourage it where you see it. Then we looked at how we've broken that image, and then how God makes a promise with us in numerous ways. There were two covenants. There was one with Noah, and then there was one with Abraham, and how he makes a promise, a covenant that is unbreakable from God's side, and that is about restoring the image in us and bringing us together, putting us back together again, as it were, like Humpty Dumpty. You know, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Well, actually, God can. And God will. And it may feel like our lives are shattered. And in fact, it may look like the world is shattered and broken beyond repair. But no, God is the great fixer, and he's made a promise to bring us together again. In fact, he's going to do everything in his power. He will lay down his life even for us in order to bring us back together again and put us back together again. So we talked about the covenants. And then we started looking at the story, because you have Abraham, and you have his children, Isaac, and then you have Jacob, and then you have the children of Jacob, Joseph, and the whole of Jacob's kind of entourage family. We all know that from the story of Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. You know all the names of his brothers because of the song. Are you hearing that in your head as you're singing? No. Okay, it's just me. In my head, every time I think of Joseph, I think of him, an amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Anyway, there was Joseph, and he went to Egypt, and God looked after his people by taking them to Egypt. It was Abraham in one land, and then he was given and Jacob, there was a famine, and so they migrated to Egypt. And Joseph was blessed because he had wisdom to look ahead, and there were 7 amazing years, and he stored all that stored it all up, and then he was able to feed not just his own nation, but also the nations around. Beautiful provision. However, that started going bad as well, and the people of Israel, they weren't even called the people of Israel yet, but the people of Jacob's family and all those who multiplied, his offspring, they began to become slaves in this foreign land. And the weight of that became heavier and heavier and heavier until they were completely oppressed. And they cried out to God, and God answered their prayer. And he sent Moses. Now Moses was born in a very oppressed situation. He was a child, very vulnerable, and he was put in the bulrushes to protect him from Pharaoh's might. You remember this story? I think of some of the children in our church, some of the young people in our church. I think of Josh, a kid whose life almost was kind of taken away from him even at a young age. Someone that we recognize is vulnerable, and yet God has rescued Josh for a purpose, like Moses. And so we have hope in this God who rescues even vulnerable children, and he rescues Moses in order to set his people free. So Moses, stuttering, stumbling, insecure, Moses is chosen by God to help his people to be saved. So they get expelled because of the plagues, and then they walk up to the edge of the Red Sea, and of course the chariots are now charging down, and they get to the edge of the Red Sea, and Moses sticks his stick into the water and it parts. Amazing. And they walk across, and then as they turn around, the stick it puts in the water again, and it closes over them, and the horse and its rider is hurled into the sea. It's brilliant. You know, the greatest terror of their lives is consumed in this tumult, kind of like ocean, sea thing, and destroyed forever, gone. So imagine the experience of being one of those people who has been enslaved for years and years and years. Your life has become smaller and smaller and smaller, and suddenly it gets transformed. Your life opens up. It's like a new day has dawned, and it's a beautiful thing. Now, last week, Kate talked about this freedom in many different ways, and I thought it was one of the most powerful talks she gave. And she was very specific to us. She kind of encouraged us to say God wants to bring us to freedom, but in a way she was saying, but it's us that is holding ourselves back. He wants to bring us into true freedom, but there's something in us we won't let him. We'll only give him so much of ourselves to bring into freedom. Do you remember that from last week? Do you remember that from last week? Nod, even if you don't remember it. That would help. Yeah, it's great. Just lets me know that you're alive and you're paying attention. That's great. So she was saying that I think, and that was a powerful word to me, because I wonder whether I'm really allowing myself to receive everything that God has for me, the true freedom he wants to offer me. And she talked about this image about which she got from the Mission film, where Robert De Niro is this broken man, and he carries this huge sack of armor, which represents all his warriorness, his fighting past that has been abusive and horrible. And he carries it around like a load of guilt. And then he takes it everywhere. And of course, he even climbs up waterfalls with this thing on his back, which is crazy. Does it as a penance. And then one of the Indians that he's fought against cuts him free and forgives him for the debt that he is struggling to carry. And he cries tears that he's never cried before. He's suddenly broken as he's set free from this stuff from the past. I think there are moments in our lives when we discover this thing, this sense of freedom, when we're suddenly let off, when we're suddenly kind of released out of something and we fly like a bird, we suddenly kind of set free from something, and it's an emotional, it's rich, it's a painful experience almost of freedom, and you kind of can't help but cry in these moments. And then you have to move on from that moment, and that's the context of where our story is today. So we've got through the Red Sea, and we're now waiting to see what's going to happen next. So Moses and Miriam, I think of Barry White and Whitney Houston, sing a duet together. I don't know if that helps. Does it help? Keep that to yourself, Rach. That's great. And they sing this beautiful song, this duet. And it starts with this refrain, and it ends with this refrain. Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. Now, it sounds like an odd thing to sing about, and not the kind of thing that we might sing about on Sunday morning. But actually what it's saying is the enemy that has been threatening us all this time has been destroyed once and for all. Once and for all, the enemy is dead. The enemy has gone, and they're free at last. They're free at last. And they rejoice, and they cry, and they dance. Here's the story of our lives as we move from death to life. There is this kind of thing that stops us, enslaves us, encroaches on our lives, and we're in slavery to it, and we can't get free. And then there's a promise of a future land, a hope that we look forward to. And then God comes and rescues us from slavery and brings us into freedom in anticipation of this promised land. What I'm talking about this morning is this bit in between the slavery that we've left behind and the freedom in its fullness that we're yet to inherit. How do we live in this in-between bit? Let's read the story again. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea. I want to talk to you this morning as leaders. Leaders of families, leaders of other people in conversations, leaders of people in your offices, leaders of people, whether it's a brother or a sister, in how to talk about your parents as they get older, leaders with your children or other people's children, leaders in this church, leaders of small groups, leaders, wherever you are, you probably have some authority and leadership. You, even in a conversation when you're chatting at Rose Cottage in the middle of the week, how you respond can be a leadership thing. You can lead a conversation in a particular direction, or you can lead it in a different way. I want to talk to you this morning as leaders. Moses is a great example of a leader who is sensitive to God. And I want you to think of yourself as a leader this morning, even if you don't normally think of yourself as a leader, because you are a leader. And I want you to imagine what it's like to be this leader, because you know what it's like. I think you'll resonate with this. Moses led Israel. Imagine that. You've come out of this thing. You've been birthed out of the waters, from the chaos of the waters. And you lead. Now, you haven't a clue where you're going. You haven't a clue where you're headed, except for you have this idea, this imaginary future that you've heard God promise you. Isn't that like what it's like for us often? We start off in one place and we know it's no good, and we anticipate that the new job is going to be so much better. We anticipate that the new relationship is going to be so much better. We anticipate that the new location of our lives, the new home, the new geography, the new place we've moved to is going to be so much better. And we're on this journey. We're leaving behind Kate. Imagine Kate. She's leaving behind Twerton with all its stuff in Twerton, and she's going to this imaginary future. She doesn't quite know what it's like. She's got some taste of it. It's invisible. And in a way, what she knows of Twerton is way more secure than the insecurity of the future, even though it may look great and beautiful and wonderful, yeah? You with me on this? That's like our lives in many different situations. So they leave behind the security, and Moses has to lead them from security, even though it's a bad security, into a new security that is unknown. And it's that journey that is difficult for us. So he leads Israel from the Red Sea, And they went into the desert of Shur. Very often when you start off and you leave your place of slavery, you enter into a new desert. You enter into a place which is an in-between land. Kate is currently in an in-between land. She's got to pack up a whole load of stuff, and she's got to put it in boxes, and then she's got to take it to a place, and then she's got to set up home. She's not going to feel at home for quite some months. It's going to feel like an in-between land. She's not going to have friends in the same way she's got friends here. She's going to be in between. It's going to be difficult for her. You're with me on this, aren't you? Yeah, you understand this emotion. We often leave one place for another place, but we go through this interim place, which is unsettling for us. For 3 days, they traveled in the desert without finding water. So imagine your family, Dad, any more water? And for the first day, yeah, of course there's more water. You've filled it up with water at the Red Sea. It's fantastic. It's great. And you've got lots of water to drink. The second day, you're beginning to ration the water. You're not exactly sure how long this is going to last. By day 3, you've run out of water. Now imagine your family going to the next door family asking so that you can have some of their water for your kids or for your gran or for your brother or whatever it is. And this whole thing rises in tension very quickly, doesn't it? As you move from kind of the slavery thing, you get the joy of the Barry White, Whitney Houston moment, but then very quickly it turns into a less good moment. Yeah? It feels like this, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Have you ever been in a car with a child hungry in the back? Have you ever? Do you know what that's like? It's hell. And as a parent responsible for finding the solution to this problem, your blood pressure just goes. It's very nervous. You're trying to do the best thing. In fact, this is supposed to be called holiday. Yeah, you're trying to do the best thing for them, and yet you're looking for a good answer to their needs. And actually, you've driven past a few other ones. You've driven past the rubbish cafe a couple of miles back, thinking that there was a better one a bit further, and then you're realizing that there isn't a better one further down, and you wish you'd gone back to the rubbish one. And the pressure builds. Now imagine you multiply that emotion, that experience, by 100,000 people. And you're Moses. And you're hearing this, "Are we nearly there yet?" kind of voice from the crowd. And now it's all people, isn't it? Why have you brought us out from this place? Have you brought us out to die? And it doesn't take long for the moaners to get going. I mean, and who wouldn't be a moaner in that situation? I would. Flipping heck. And of course we would encourage each other in our moaning. Yeah, we would go straight. Imagine you're Moses handling this. How would you be feeling? You'd be feeling like we feel in the car with stuff in the back. Anxious, stressed, desperate to find a solution. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. Imagine you come over the hill. Last water. Person after person goes up to the water. And they look around each other. "I'm not drinking it. You drink it. I'm not drinking that. It's disgusting. Have you tasted it? It's horrible." And the tension just builds because they've run towards this water that seemed like it would feed them, seemed like it would quench their thirst. And suddenly it's worse than ever. So the people grumbled. Flipping right, they did. And that's an understatement, isn't it? I mean, if you were there would be some grumbling. What are we to drink? Fundamental question of life. We're going to die. It's very urgent. And the water is bitter. Have you ever been set free from something and thought, "This is great"? Have you ever been baptized and then a few days after your baptism, it feels as if you're dry, and then in fact, it feels worse. It feels bitter. Do you know what I mean by this? Have you ever had a great experience one week, had a fantastic holiday, great high, you feel so much better, and then got back to work the week after, And then you hit a problem early on in your first week back from work, and you just feels like, the holiday has gone, and it feels like I wish I'd never gone. It just feels bitter. Have you ever been anticipating a relationship where you kind of think this is great, and then you get married or you get connected to this person in some way or other, and then a few weeks on, you suddenly feel like you have a row, and it feels bitter. Feels bitter. It was supposed to bring you life, but instead, yeah? What do we do in the situations where we know that in a way we don't want to go back, but the present and moving forward just seems bitter to taste? Remember Jesus? He had the same experience. He had his baptism moment, didn't he? And it was a beautiful moment. Heavens opened. Couldn't get better than that. Heavens opened. The dove, the Spirit coming on him, fantastic. The voice saying, "You are my son in whom I'm well pleased." And then the Spirit leads him into the wilderness. How many days did it take him before he thought, this isn't such a good deal? He was tempted in every way like we are tempted, wasn't he? He was, wasn't he? And doesn't it feel like that? And aren't you glad that he went through his own period of bitterness thing? It feels like it's inevitable that we'll hit this wall. I think that's a better picture of what it's like, that this middle bit can often feel bitter. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Bitter is a good word, isn't it, for it? I think very often as we move from one thing to another, we hit a wall. I was talking to a dad this week who was talking about his son, hoping that his son would move from anxiety into hope and confidence. And he's seen his son move and start a course, and he was full of admiration and pride as his son had made that move. And then the course, when you start a course, everything's good for a few days, and then you hit the first things that you have to do, and it had become hard, and the anxiety that he'd left behind had suddenly returned, and it felt like it was in a bitter place again. So what do we do in these situations? Well, what a lot of us do is we head back to the security of the past. Isn't that right? We go back into our old ways because it feels better than the bitter place where we're in at the moment. And we can't see the promised land. It seems too imaginary. And so we retreat. But not Moses. I love this. Moses cries out to the Lord. I would have done that. Help! Cries out to the Lord. Now, this is a one-verse story, but I imagine it's a little bit bigger in reality than what actually the number of words on the page. Moses cries out to the Lord. How long did that take? Was that just a quick help? Or I imagine it wasn't an immediate answer. He had to work at that. He was stewed up. He was anxious. He went out to God and he started saying, God, this is no good. I need to do something about this. Come on, God, what are you going to do? And I imagine that God wasn't immediate. I mean, have you prayed to God recently like that? You don't get an immediate answer straight up. And he's full of anxiety, full of nervous worry. And he's crying out to God. Maybe after a while he slowed down and stilled himself. I don't know. Maybe he just kept ranting at God. But I wonder whether after a while he slowed down in his head, quiet enough to notice something. And he notices a piece of wood. The Lord showed him a piece of wood. This is ridiculous. He's got 100,000 people thirsty, on the verge of death, and God shows him a piece of wood. What would have your response been? I'm not interested in a piece of wood right now. I'm not building an ark. This is not. What's good's a piece of wood? I would have gone, I don't know why the wood is. Why are you showing me a piece of wood? Why is my attention being drawn to a piece of wood? What good's a piece of wood right now? Wouldn't you? I would have. You can know where to stick that piece of wood, flipping heck. What good's a piece of wood? And yet, somehow he's attentive enough to his spirit, or to the Spirit, that he takes the piece of wood, and for some reason, and you have to admire the guy, he decides to chuck it into the water. And then he goes to taste the water as if that has made a difference. Now, he's got no history kind of in the background of his life. He's got no stories to base this on. He's got no experience ever of wood turning water from bitter into sweet. He's never had this experience before. So he's like right on the edge of plausibility here. And he sips the water, and then he's very happy, but amazed. This water thing that he hadn't noticed, this wood thing that he hadn't noticed, has suddenly transformed everything. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. Brothers and sisters, all of us in a bitter place today, two words I've got for you is attention and trust. In my urgency to solve problems, I very rarely pay attention to God. I'm being honest. Are you like me? In my urgency to solve the problem of my kids, the problem of my finances, the problem of my unease, the problem of my relationships, I get into active mode. That's my preferred mode. How do you sort problems? Do you write lists? Do you go around things again and again? Do you share your problems with others, hoping that they're going to sort out the issue? What do you do to solve problems when they come at you? I get into active mode. And the worse the problem, the more problems I've got, the more active I get. Which makes for a great marriage, if you ask Tori. Because as the pressures increase, and inevitably they do, don't they, at times, I just get busier and more manic, which isn't very good. And what I don't do is what Moses did. I don't cry out to God as quickly as he did, and I don't pay attention to what he says. What would it look like to be a person who routinely, when the pressure builds, pays attention to the Father, rather than is driven by an inner need to sort this out ourselves? Now, all of you, because I know you, are facing incredibly difficult, stressful situations. You tell me this again and again and again, and I agree with you. They are incredibly difficult, complicated, unanswerable situations. I sometimes hear you tell me this, and I begin to want to fix you, rather than pay attention. So if one of you comes forward for prayer, you'll come with your problem, and I'll go into fix mode, as if I've got to find the right words or find the right idea or find the right image to kind of help that would fix you, instead of paying attention to the one who is the fixer and the healer. You with me on this? Do you do this? And I wonder whether I'm doing you a disservice, and I wonder whether we're doing each other a disservice by routinely trying to fix each other rather than take ourselves to the place where we meet the real fixer. When was the last time you shared a problem with someone in this room and they said, "Let us pray," and they didn't pray out loud and try and fix you in their prayer, but they actually paid attention to God? Do you know what I mean? And they waited. And they waited. Until God showed them a piece of wood. The thing is that then God shows you a piece of wood and you go, "Well, that ain't any good. That's not going to help. I'm not going to tell them that." When it's the piece of wood that's the most important thing. And we've got to learn, haven't we? Haven't I? Got to learn how to pick up strange things like bits of wood to solve problems that are unanswerable. There is another piece of wood later on in the story. Don't you love this? The way that things kind of crop up in different bits. There's another piece of wood later on in the story. which a lot of people can't quite pick up, but is the great fixer-upper. We need to keep going back to the piece of wood. We need to keep going back to Jesus. We need to chuck him into the problem, the bitterness, the anxiety, the fear. And then drink. And that needs trust. Needs trust. And as they drank, they experienced freedom again. Although it was only just enough freedom to get over the hill, wasn't it? You imagine them all drinking as they bathed and enjoyed the new water that was a moment ago bitter. And you imagine the hesitation. The early adopters were first in once they'd heard that the bitter was sweet, the water was sweet, and they went in straight in. But the slow coaches, they weren't sure. Oh, I tasted it a moment ago. I saw people spit that out. I'm not going to drink that stuff. And it took a little while for everybody to get. But once they saw everybody going, then the whole crowd jumped in and they started enjoying this water. And they filled themselves up with water. They filled up their water bottles with water. They took on this water, but they still had to keep going. And isn't that right? Because we get enough for today, but we don't get enough for tomorrow and the next day and the next day. We have to keep trusting every single day, which is the story of Exodus 16 and the manna, and Exodus 17, the water. We have to learn how to trust on a daily basis. Now, you may have had water a few weeks ago. You may have had water a month ago, but you've run out of water today, and you need to go back to the place where there is water. You with me on this? It's not enough to have had water a few weeks ago. You're thirsty today. Thirsty again today, and we need to trust again today. And do you see how the story goes on? It said, then the Lord issued a ruling and an instruction. It's quite strong, it's quite heavy. I issue a ruling and an instruction. It's quite strong. And he put them to the test. Now, do you see that there's a testness? He's trying to get them to live with him in complete dependence on a routine, everyday basis. Put them to the test. And he said, if you listen carefully, listen. Anyone listening in the room? Any listeners to the voice of God? If you listen carefully to the Lord your God, if you pay attention to him, if you shut up for a moment, Richard, just shut up and sit down. Stop fidgeting, said my mum. But also God, if I could just still myself for a moment and pay attention. Listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, not my eyes. I have my lists, the things that are right in my eyes, for all kinds of problems. But they're not the things that are right in his eyes. If you pay attention to his commands, and if he says something, do it, and you keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the dis-ease, the unsettledness, the dis-eases that I brought on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord, I am Yahweh, the one who heals you. It's good, isn't it? I believe that the healer is here for those who will pay attention. It comes down to attention and trust. Exodus 15 finishes with this, the last two verses. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. This wasn't Mirror, the bitterness. This was beautiful. And for a while they rested in the provision of God. I believe that God is taking us from slavery and death into freedom, and we have traveled with him from the past. But all of us, as we've stepped into this new life, have hit walls, new challenges. 3 days in, 5 days in, a month in. And we've come up to the end of our resources. I think many of us in this room are at the end of our resources to solve the issues that we are facing in our lives, in our marriages, in our finances, conflicts with neighbors, health issues, things at work, when we feel overwhelmed. And we think, oh, maybe if I just have a piece of cake, as if that's going to help. Or get busy, as if that's going to help. Or go back to my old way of living. Or give up hope altogether. And God says, if you call on me, I will answer. If my people cry out to me and humble themselves, I will answer them.